notice the green shirt, and that's something in his pocket. It's not a name, because Bus did not believe in logos. But he did believe in green and white. So I got the call that Bill Clark took and was invited to triumph for Intrepid in 1967. I didn't make it on Intrepid, I was brand new on big boats, but I made it onto the #2 boat, which was Constellation. We sailed in all the trials, and Intrepid went and won the cup. But I'm wearing this green shirt because over the years I've chartered Intrepid, and now they do believe in having logos. But it's still the green and white color. That's Intrepid, including her boot stripes on her hull and her sail numbers. So very much a connection. This is winning the cup in '67. And the idiot with the Budweiser hat in the back is me with a thick Buddy Holly eyeglasses. The other idiot with the glasses is David Rockefeller. So I was a bit that's President Kennedy waving to Bus after the finish of the race. Kennedy would come and go on a Navy destroyer. Bus won the cup in a boat named Weatherly. The Gretel 1 was a faster boat from Australia. They had their big coffee grinder winches linked together so 4 men could get on one winch, and only the Australians had that. The Americans had 2 to a winch. So Gretel just wore out the American crew, but the Americans won 4-1 based on tactics. But that's the famous shot of Gretel surfing past Weatherly on the leg of the race she won. That's us in starboard tack in the background crossing Ted Turner and Courageous, another year on Enterprise. This is the Dartmouth sailing team today. And they went to the Nationals, and they qualified for all the main events, and they were top 10. I don't know the exact results. They finished a couple of days ago, or I would have had some of the kids here. These are, I'm kind of going through shipmates. So Lee Riker in the middle, Bill out to the right, and a young Rick Pouch there. Teammates is Cornelius. I told you I'd get you in. I don't have a picture of you, Dan. And come on here. Yeah. Okay. And that's our ski group that started by Jerry Bell, but since been run by Larry and Julia, and others pitching in. And we stuck in the corner Weems Westfeld, who is the head instructor. He teaches all the instructors at Aspen. Was the most wonderful guy, he's a classmate of ours, and took us all out skiing, and it was hysterical as he tried to improve us. It's a great group that gets together, and it's something we hope we can continue for a long time. Now, getting into the sailing side, anything like sailing, mountain climbing, any of these outdoor stuff, there's a risk element to it, and then there's a decision-making element to it. And those are threads I'm going to try to pull together. And Plutarch to Pompey, this is when Rome was running out of grain, and they had to take the ships across the Mediterranean and go to Carthage and get the grain over back to Rome. This is kind of what I think appealed to a lot of us. Many of us went to Dartmouth because it was different than other colleges. It was in a different location. It had the outdoors bit. Many of us acquired it here, and some people came here and couldn't stand it. They're probably now at the reunion. But then go out into the void space of the world for various reasons. Some are actuated simply by love of adventure. Some have keen thirst for scientific knowledge. Some others again are drawn from the trodden paths by the lure of little voices, the mysterious fascination of the unknown. Ernest Shackleton. And his first trip to Antarctica was this expedition, the Nimrod, where he and 2 men walked their way across Antarctica, got within 97 miles of the pole, far closer than anybody had ever gotten. And they turned around because Shackleton knew that the weather was changing, their food supply was minimal, and that if they tried to continue the 97-2 and back, they would die. He turned around, he made his decision, he assessed his risk. And that's what a lot of this talk will be about. And his book. There you go.
Basement bus Mossbacher.
He should have said duMoulin doesn't live here. But we don't any of this. So but the thing is that we all have technology, and in all the sports or activities we do, we use it, whether it's iPhones, whether it's navigation, GPSs, satellite communications, wireless. And it changes the way one approaches the activity. However, you can't count on it. You can't count on electronics. You've got to still figure out, how do I get out of the woods with a paper chart and compass? Or how do I navigate without GPS? How do I make sure I can come back depending totally on my own resources? And that's what sailing's about. It's not unique to sailing, but it's the angle that I come across. So leadership and seamanship. Now, it could be leadership in woodsmanship, or it could be leadership in whatever other skill. Mountaineer, yeah. And the question really is something like seamanship, an old skill, one of the oldest in the world, is it still relevant? And the answer, I think, is that all the major navies of the world still train their young officers on sailing ships or sailing vessels. Because you learn the independence of having to make your decisions, but the importance of teamwork and dealing with the elements and the forces without all the modern help. It's manpower, it's how to organize yourselves, it's how to respect the ocean, and learn the basic skills. The role of captain I find really interesting because ultimately the captain or the owner of the boat or the head of the expedition, whatever it is, has to be responsible for decision making and for risk assessment. And in the old days, the expression would be master and commander, because when you were out there, you were alone. There's no way for anybody to reach you, no radio, no nothing. And she had total power and responsibility. And it was kind of a binary situation when a ship left the port. And this goes until the end of the 1800s. When a ship left the port, it either arrived or was never seen again. So you think about the responsibility of the captain and for the preparation of the crew and the vessel itself. There are some great captains which I'll touch on, and don't laugh at Bly, he was a great captain. But the fun one I have is with Arthur Rostron and Bully Waterman. I don't expect anybody here to know who these guys were. Does anybody?
Nope.
Okay. Waterman was in the upper picture was the captain of the Sea Witch, which was the first true clipper ship. And Griffith was the designer. And what's interesting about the clippers was they were the greatest advance in technology of their day. For thousands of years, sailing ships have been made, but it was not, you never, when you read about the old books of sailing ships up to the clippers, you never hear about speed. Speed didn't really matter. You got there, you carried your cargo, you carried your guns, and when you finally learned how to have limes and lemons, you got rid of the scurvy. But speed was never the issue. But something happened in 1849. What happened in 1849 changed the equation?
Gold rush.
Gold rush. What gold rush?
California.
What other gold rush? No,
Australia.
Australia. So here you have gold in two remote locations. What could be more remote before the Panama Canal and all that than Alaska and California? Excuse me, Australia and California. And the clipper ship was developed because speed was money. People wanted to get out there. And so the first clipper, semi-clipper, was the Rainbow. The first full clipper was the Sea Witch. And when she did her trip, the other was tea. The other commodity was tea, which was really big in England and America. So tea and gold were the drivers. And the Sea Witch, when she did her trip to China and back, arrived back in New York 5 weeks before she was expected. That's how fast she was. And the clippers would race. They'd go into the ports in China and wait for the tea crop to come down on the barges down the Yangtze and Yellow River, and the agents would get the ships loaded as fast as possible, and they'd get out because the first ship to the New York and London docks got the biggest price on its commodity. And this is an actual story of two sailing ships that left together from China and arrived in the Thames River estuary at the same time. One got a faster steam tug and got pulled up to the London docks a half hour earlier. So this is about seamanship. And this was the course that they took. And the reason I brought these is to kind of visualize the world, and also to tease Jerry Bell that I had more props than he did.
Yeah, I didn't bring us.
Say, Rich,
Jerry is a pain in the ass. So, yeah.
what was the technological advance?
The technological advance was that up till that point in time, sailing ships had blunt bows, and they had very fine sterns, kind of fish shaped. And it was seaworthy because it had a lot of buoyancy up forward, and narrow aft so the rudder could work a little better. But the fact was they pushed water, and the faster they went, the stern would sink and drag. So they couldn't go fast. Clipper ship reversed it. Sharp bow to cut through the waves, and then a very full stern, so the faster it went, the stern didn't sink, it had buoyancy. They also had much more rigging, bigger crews, more ballast down low, and they could go over 20 knots. And they were hugely faster than the prior ships. Yeah.
Where was Sea Witch built, and where were most of them built?
The American clippers were built in New York and Massachusetts primarily, and the British had lots of yards all over, but mainly British and American, very few from other countries. They dominated the waters. And there was no canal in Suez. The sailing ships followed the wind pattern down the South China Sea for 2,000 miles, through Sunda Strait, across the Indian Ocean, around Africa, up the Atlantic, into either England or America, or from Australia, or the West Coast. So these are all areas that the clippers service. And what's interesting about, you talk about sailing around the world, the reason I brought the globe is, sailing around the world is not an east-west exercise, it's a north-south exercise. Because if you can only do it with the globe, but if you look at the Earth, you've got Antarctica at the bottom, and all the continents kind of trail off towards Antarctica. So if you're going around the world, you literally sail down the Atlantic. Get this. If you're going from the United States or Europe, you sail down the Atlantic, you get down near Antarctica, and you circle Antarctica, then you come up the Pacific, or you come back up the Atlantic. Because and the closer you come to Antarctica, the shorter the distance, but the closer you are to the ice.
Right.
And you get down to the 40-degree latitudes line in the south, and it's the roaring 40s, it's the fierce 50s, shrieking 60s, these are latitudes. And in the 50s and 60s, you encounter ice. And so even today's around the world races, the game is how close can you cut Antarctica? How much cold can your crew stand? Living conditions are awful. And some of the boats just have to soak to the north to get back into warmer water and warmer air. So it's all about cutting Antarctica and going north-south from Europe to the United States.
And that's Cape Horn, right at the bottom of.
Yeah, when you look at this, this is the winds circle the Earth and never hit land. That's why you get the awful conditions down in the lower southern hemisphere that you don't get anywhere else on Earth.
Rich, how do those solar sailors plane 30 miles an hour for extended periods of time without sleep, at the same time dodging growlers?
It's unbelievable. The solo sailors like Rich Wilson, who's the guy I'll talk about later, basically practice ways of catching sleep, and everybody's different physiologically. And some people going around the world will never get more than 30 minutes of sleep at a time, but they go deep for a short period, they wake up, they check everything, check the radar, check navigation, go back to sleep. But at a certain point, it becomes random. You can't see growlers, the small ice bits, which are enough to break a boat. Yeah. So there's a big risk involved. And nowadays with containers and a lot of trash in the water, and boats going higher speeds, you hear damage all the time. In the old conventional vessels, you're going 7, 8, 9, 10 knots. A knot is a little more than a mile an hour. You can hit things and get away with it. But when you're going 30, 40, 50 knots, you can't hit anything and get away with it.
They're going 50 knots?
Yeah, they can get up to 50.
But they maintain themselves on the wavefront, don't they?
No, it's no more about waves. In the heavy old boats, it's about surfing waves and gravity helping. On the new ones, you don't want waves. They're so fast, they either lift out of the water on hydrofoils, or they foil off their centerboards or keels, or they have special foils on the side. I'll show a few shots later. This is the fastest monohull in the world. This is a boat named Comanche. And 100-foot carbon fiber owned by Jim Clark and Netscape. Sailed by 23 pros. And in the transatlantic race 3 years ago, I skippered a boat named Karina Lee Reichert. Reichert was one of our watch captains. And it's an old 48-footer, very heavy, 36,000 pounds. That boat is 100-foot, only weighs about 10,000 more than us. And I had a bet with the skipper of that boat, Kenny Reed, who would get to England first. And the reason the bet was exciting was we started a week before they did. And our previous transatlantic, where we had 4 fathers and 5 sons on the boat, we had a different crew on this one, the kids couldn't make it. We did it in 21 days. Well, this race, this trip across, it blew between 20 and 40 knots from behind the whole race except for the first 12 hours for us. For Comanche, they had no wind the first 24 hours. Then they blasted, and they were doing 600-mile, 700-mile days.
Wow.
And well, we had a bet. The finish line was a line due south of the Lizard, which is the entrance to English Channel. It's a peninsula on the southwest English coast. Due south by GPS. When you cross that line, you finish. You take your time, and they watch you on satellite. And we blew out all our spinnakers on the way across. We had nothing but our jib winged out. We're going 12 knots. And I'm tracking on the satellite tracker Comanche. I'm saying, we can do it, we can do it. And they burst out of the clouds and rain about a half a mile behind us, just as we crossed the line. And we're the first boat they've seen for 7 days. So it's just a cool shot.
That is a cool shot.
Do you have the video? Yeah.
The video?
Yeah, you have a video.
We're going 12 knots.
And here comes command.
That looks like he's being nosing in practically.
How fast do they go?
Don't go a whole lot faster.
The ones who make us in the dust. We're going 12, he's going about 30. But we won the bet.
What does he have? He's got log boards there almost.
What he's got is he's got two center boards at an angle, pull one up, put one down, and two rudders, one each side. And now boats like this are getting fitted with foils off the side, and they lift up, and they're just kissing the water of the boat. This was pre the full foiling. But full foiling is now being done by the French on these giant trimarans. Yeah, like there's Massif, which just went around the world alone with this one mad Frenchman on board. In 41 days to go 28,000 miles. IDEC on the right, sailed by this guy Francis Choyon from France, who's a tough guy. He took parts of his old IDEC and built a new IDEC. He takes no outside assistance for weather routing. Guy is an Ironman. The boat in the bottom is the one I did in 2003. We sailed from Hong Kong to New York. It was much older generation of those trimarans. We're a 53-footer, they're 120. And we fly one hull, but not the entire boat. But that's the comparison in technology. That's Great American. And she's 53, she's probably about 30 wide. And it's just so old and ancient now compared to what there is now.
I see you got a
How was she
Dodge
built?
in there.
She was built in 1990 and then modified a couple times along the way.
What's this Dodger shit anyway?
When you're going fast in these boats, you've got to get protection because you've got solid water hitting you all the time, and it really wears you out.
Oh, God, yeah.
Now, getting back on the, and I'll run through this quickly. I always like to ask people about what's made the biggest difference for mariners, but the answer is wireless. That's where the world changed from where the ship was totally independent to where now the ship is in connection. And it didn't matter that it was the wireless or the Morse code with kind of limited amount of verbiage you get through. The fact is that now the captain had somebody on shore trying to tell him what to do, or somebody reach out to for help. But does that change his responsibility is the question. And you could say no, but it does force change. And all through the years since Marconi, the whole shipping world, the Navy world, have been trying to, and even sailing, have been coping with this question now that when you're at sea in command, you really have to be able to make your own decisions, and yet you have this ability to communicate, or people communicate to you. And it's kind of interesting that since Marconi, I would say it's not revolution, because it's more of the same, meaning more communication, easier, but at the end of the day, the real change was the ability to communicate, not the method. And now you have the internet, which is binary like wireless was. So before Marconi, those were kind of the characteristics.
How much of a business management versus risk is involved? Is it still up to the captain?
They're
pretty much.
All the disasters you find nowadays, somewhere embedded, are very often a communications question. I'll go through some of those. It's a good question. So what communication is allowed with boats or with planes now is centralized command control. It changes the way navies operate, merchant marines, shipping companies operate, sailboat regattas operate. But at the end of the day, it all comes back to the captain. And that's what we like to focus on, because that's where the leadership still matters. So to put a little historical perspective, what's kind of fun is to go back to the Titanic. And a lot of people will poo-poo it, it's the old story. But the fact is, it's the most dramatic event in maritime history. And you walk down any street in the country and you say, name a ship. 9 out of 10 people are going to say Titanic. Name a tanker, it'll be Exxon Valdez, and shame in my industry. But the fact is that Titanic was the major event when it comes to maritime operations safety. Captain Rostron was the captain of the Carpathia, the ship that rescued the survivors. And his story is interesting. When you did a rescue in those days, you had a unsinkable mile of ground give you a trophy. And so Carpathia was a second rater. She wasn't a first rater like the Titanic. she had one radio telegraph operator, not two. So he'd go to sleep when he was tired. And all the radio operators worked for the Marconi company, and they were contracted to the liner companies. So a lot of them knew each other. And when the Titanic hit the iceberg, the radio operator on the Carpathia was about to go to sleep. He's in his pajamas sitting on the edge of his bunk, and for the hell of it, he just grabbed his headphones and put them on. And he heard the most famous SOS in history, not the first, but the most famous, from the Titanic. Now, every other ship the Titanic communicated with couldn't believe the Titanic wasn't joking. And so they kept asking for confirmations. But the radio operator Carpathia knew the signal of the guy sending, and knew it wasn't a joke. And he just ripped the latitude and longitude off this pad of paper, ran up to the bridge in the middle of the night, woke up the captain. The captain didn't say, "We'll go back and check on this." Rostron ran to the navigating table, plotted the lat line of the Titanic, turned the bow of the Carpathia up to max speed 14 knots. He then pulled all his officers onto the bridge, and he had the chief engineer shut off all the heat, all the steam going to all the cabins, because she had passengers, so that steam could go into the main propulsion and go faster. And they got her up to 17 knots. Because Rostron's thinking, it's April, the water is 32 degrees, people are dying, this ship is sinking, and speed counts. He had his guys rig lighting around the perimeter of the ship, hang nets down, get all the cranes out, all the boats ready to go. He knew people's lives depended on their response. So this is what we try to teach when we teach safety at sea.
How far away were
They were about 3 hours steaming away.
No.
So they were probably about, at that point, 50 miles ballpark. And so Rostron was visualizing, he was leading, he was making decisions, he was preparing. And when he had the hot blankets brought into the galley to get warm, they had soup ready. And Carpathia was on its way, and she was the one who rescued all 705 survivors of the Titanic. And, this is a shot, I found this on YouTube, it's amazing. This is her entering New York Harbor.
With the survivors.
With the survivors on board. It was a madhouse in New York. And no sound, of course. What's interesting is you see the tall masts and all the wires. They thought that the bigger wires for the radio signal would be better. In fact, since then they've learned 35 feet is the right wavelength for a single sideband radio. But Carpathia did her thing. Captain Rostron was recognized for seamanship, and of the survivors, 705 people, 214 were crew members, the rest were passengers. The organization, which I've chaired for 6 years in New York, the Seamen's Church, took care of the crew, while the various public agencies took care of the passengers. And the Titanic Memorial was put on our roof. That building's long since down, but the memorial's on the corner of Water and Fulton. It's an old lighthouse, but with a plaque. It's really worth looking at. And so the question is, that's 1912. The captain we talked about was Rostron. The captain of the Titanic went down with the ship. Great sea captain, but made some terrible errors in that voyage. But nowadays, is it respected? Is the leadership respected? Well, 100 years almost to the day after the Titanic, Costa Concordia cut a corner in Italy. The captain wanted to show off the ship to friends of his on shore. He's socializing with one of the dancers, and they ripped the bottom out. And the only good thing he did that night is he ran her aground, ripped the other side out. So when the ship semi-capsized, it was on the rocks. But he abandoned ship with his crew on board and his passengers on board.
He went to jail, didn't he?
Yeah. Let me see if I get this thing going. This is the Italian Coast Guard talking to him.
There's
Sono bambini, donne o persone di soggiorno di assistenza e vi dice il numero di ciascuna di queste categorie. È chiaro? Guardi Schettino che lei si è salvato forse dal mare, ma io lo porto veramente molto male, faccio passare gli anni di guai. Vada a bordo, cazzo!
So Schettino is now in jail. So 100 years go by, technology changes, but look what happens. So clear character matters. Voyage planning, situation awareness. Now this is, a marine operation type of slide, but this could be applied to a business. It could be applied to a mountaineering expedition. It could be applied anywhere.
Did you want to go over the raising that ship off the rocks? There's a video on that.
It's incredible, the work it's
Nova,
done.
perhaps. I mean, if you want to see some incredible engineering.
Well, wreck removal is part of what your insurance pays for. Now, the O'Farrow in 2016 went down. Hurricane Joaquin. Big hurricane stopped and began to wiggle, and no one knew where it was going to go. And this is the Bahama Islands, and there's Puerto Rico there. And the O'Farrill would go between Jacksonville and Puerto Rico. Captain with a very good reputation. The ship, although it was old, had certainly weathered plenty of storms. The captain made the fateful decision to go between the storm and the Bahama Islands on his way to Puerto Rico, instead of coming down the Florida Channel where he could escape into the Gulf of Mexico. And then the captain basically didn't take input from his crew and was using weather reports about 6 hours old. But he put his ship in a dangerous situation. When the hurricane began to move, it came straight out. And eventually the power failed on the ship. The ship went sideways to the storm and eventually went down with all hands. And all hands. 28 crew and 5 Polish workers on board. And so she went down, and the National Transport Safety Board just put out an amazing 11-minute video explanation of the disaster. You got a narrator, you got videos, non-dramatic, but it's huge impact. And it's about decision-making and maintenance and planning and all the rest. Yeah,
The book just came out about the sinking.
Yeah.
And I heard a guy interviewed on the radio last week, and supposedly they did not have a working anemometer or wind direction indicator to know where they might be in relation to the storm either.
There were 30 or 40 contributing factors, but if there's one, it's the planning of the voyage. When you guys, if you go cruising or racing, the biggest decision is, I'm leaving port. And if you get weather forecasts that say you shouldn't leave port, well, go by that. Now the Navy's had its fate of collisions and troubles, and the Navy report talks about lack of situational awareness and fundamental seamanship on the part of their officers of the bridge. I'm not going to get into details, but it shows the problem is still there. So for a moment, I'll hit some of history's great voyages, and looking at the smaller boats. Captain Bligh is known more for the mutiny, but in fact, if you've ever read Men Against the Sea, on the small boat journey, when Fletcher Christian put the captain and 18 of his people on board the longboat and left them to die, they sailed over 3,000 miles to Batavia, which is now Jakarta, and he only lost one man to cannibals who attacked them when they were trying to go ashore. And the leadership of Bligh was unbelievable. And so it's one of the great voyages ever done. Bounty 2, the replica, is in New London, Connecticut, as Hurricane Sandy's heading for the U.S. coast. Yep. And the owner wants the ship in Florida. The captain has no fear. And so they leave New London 48 hours before Sandy hits, thinking they'll sail behind it. Well, it sunk, and the captain died. The woman who was a cook on board died. The Coast Guard nearly died rescuing the rest of the guys. And the owner did not go to jail, which to me is the shame of this one, because he shouldn't have let that ship go to sea. But here, look at the number of years between that, and great seamanship and horrible seamanship. This is perhaps my favorite, Shackleton. Men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. The last time I read that is when I was applying at Dartmouth.
Great.
So anyway, most of you probably know the story. Shackleton locked into the ice, ship sunk through the ice. He and his men spent months dragging their boats across the ice to Elephant Island, then adding freeboard to the boat with a piece of wood from another lifeboat, and animal skins over the top, and 6 of the guys going off to sail 1,000 miles across the Drake Passage, passing Cape Horn and going to South George Island, then climbing mountains to get to the Norwegian village.
And showing up.
And it's unbelievable. But his management of people was what's spectacular. Harvard Business School now uses Shackleton cases to teach leadership. And Shackleton was very empathetic with the people he was with. They said it was because he grew up in a family of a mother and all sisters, that he was very empathetic with other people. And when he identified people's weaknesses, he helped them. It wasn't the tough military approach. And what's common among virtually all the explorers is they were merchant mariners. Almost all the great explorers were merchant mariners, some were Navy. And part of the reason is they're trained to be isolated in compact situations, long periods of concentration together, dealing with problems, and somehow facing unknown and uncertainties and dealing with it properly, which was not kind of training that a soldier necessarily got. But the sailors got it, and the better ones often were the merchant sailors who couldn't just rule with authority only, like the Navy guys. How many of us were in the Navy? Okay. But Shackleton, these quotes are from the diaries of the men who were with him. And you think these guys isolate in Antarctica while World War I is raging, and they're totally out of touch for several years. You'd think they'd be pessimistic. He could visualize things ahead, and as far as he could, he safeguarded any eventuality that was likely to occur. He made contingency plans in great detail while still remaining flexible. He wasn't afraid to change his mind as the situation warranted. No matter what turns up, he's always ready to alter his plans and make fresh ones. And in the meantime, laugh, joke, and keep everyone's spirits up. He inspires optimism in everyone. So these are kind of the lessons of Shackleton. He's a pretty handsome guy.
Yeah, I know, very.
Here he is after the after the 2 years. And this is the quote from the lady who made the case for Harvard Business School. Acknowledge turbulence, embrace its opportunities, and meet its challenges with confidence and effect. And Napoleon, a leader is a dealer in hope. First around the world race alone, only one guy finished it, Robin Knox Johnson, 313 days, basically out of touch and alone, eating canned food. And he didn't lose his mind. He's a terrific, funny guy. And that's his boat spray. They're now reenacting the 50th anniversary of this race, 1968. Is about to start, and they've got something like 30 boats, and they're limited to old boats of old design, below 40 feet, guys sailing alone, guys and ladies, and they're going to repeat this race. Now, only one boat finished this race. A Frenchman, Bernard Mortissier, would have won it, except after going around the world in the lead, he decided he didn't want to go back to civilization, so he went around the world again and settled in the Polynesia. One guy committed suicide, Donald Crowhurst, on the race. The movie about him with Colin Firth is about to appear, called The Mercy. And another guy who had a similar boat to the one who committed suicide and pushed his boat real hard, and it finally broke up near the finish line. He couldn't finish, and he committed suicide later because he went bankrupt. So it's one of the races where when these guys went around alone, it was tough, lonely, long. You put your life and your finances on the line. But this guy is still one of the world's great sailors. This is probably today's best American sailor, Rich Wilson, twice around the world alone, done all the long voyages to break the clipper ship records. I was his partner on the one from Hong Kong. He went to Harvard and MIT and then taught math in some of the poor parts of Boston. And he got very upset because kids didn't want to learn, they were bored. He came up with a program, which he still runs, called Sites Alive, where he connects classrooms to real-world stuff going on. Scientists in the rainforest, bluegrass musicians in the Ozarks, and oceans racing. So when we did our trip in 2003, we had 250,000 eighth graders following us. And the technology then wasn't today's, so we would send by satellite phone articles we'd write. They had a pre-organized program. Every week of our 11 weeks at sea, they'd have a different package, and the newspapers would carry it. But Rich is primarily an educator, but he's a great adventurer and a terrific sailor. The famous disasters in sailing history, the Fastener race, big storm hit, and a lot of boats couldn't cope with it. Great rescue effort by the British. Sydney Hobart, 1998. These changed. This is a picture of Sydney Hobart the year we took our boat. That's not our boat, but this is not the kind of conditions that killed the people, but it's kind of typical of the vast strait between Australia and Hobart, Australia and Tasmania. Yeah.
Oh my God.
A helicopter went out and got that.
The helicopter took that?
Helicopter took that shot. Yeah. And this is a well-named Australian boat, Wild Thing. Yeah. And frankly, it's probably got too much sailing up.
I would say,
It's probably blowing about 50 there, 45, 50.
but it's making good
But
progress through it.
They're all on the rail there.
Yeah.
I've only played golf once in my life. When I looked at this, I thought I might change sports. But the Australians are tough. They do this race every year. We do the Bermuda race every other year. And this will be my 25th starting next Friday. There's one guy who has more, who's alive, and that's one of my best pals at home who just had an appendix taken out, so I might catch up to him this year. Anyway. That's us down in the Bass Strait with a front about to hit us, the lightning bolt, like one of my sons caught. That's the Four Fathers, Five Sons crew. And we had a great time, and we raced the boat transatlantic and then fastened it. And the kids sailed the boat to Australia, we met it there, we did Sydney Hobart, then the kids sailed it back to New York. And it was an around the world adventure. But there was a big response in the community, both of these disastrous races, in terms of looking at inspecting the boat, the stability, both static, meaning sitting there and you try to tip it, how stiff is the boat, and then dynamic, the impact of waves hitting the side of the boat. Safety at sea training is what Lee and myself, a lot of us are very involved in, which is training both juniors and adults, safety and leadership. And then, of course, design change, the equipment, the safety equipment. But 2012, a lot of bad incidents, particularly in California and San Francisco, raced the Farallones. This one boat cut the Farallones too close, and he's in 25 feet of water, but there's a swell from the ocean, and 25 feet that swell would break. One boat with the green path managed to get through at the right time, but the low-speed chase didn't. And the core reason why people died wasn't the wave. I mean, the wave was a mistake. But the owner abdicated his leadership. He had a local hotshot sailor steering the boat, and the owner sat back and didn't take charge. No one was navigating. They had all the safety gear on board. They were even wearing some of it, but they weren't using it. Somebody had a tether. He wasn't hooked to the boat. 5 people died. All got washed off the boat. The 3 who managed to stay on board survived. And then that's when it hits you, when you see faces. And then 2 weeks later, in the Ensenada race, this boat stopped racing and started motoring. They found that out later when they looked at the spot, its transmitter, that quit sailing at the top because it wasn't moving, put on its engine. But in looking, that's the only piece I could find of it. In the charts, some charts you have to zoom down to see if there's anything there in the islands. They used just the large scale, they set the course for Ensenada, and they went right up on the unlit Coronado Islands. And then a little while later, a boat lost its rudder off of San Clemente Island, called for the Coast Guard, Mayday, smart thing to do, no rudder, you're just a windward of breakers on a beach. And then Cito said, we're coming out. So these guys told the Coast Guard they were okay. Well, Cito couldn't make it. And these guys went on the rocks and won the crew dive. So all the same old stuff. I mean, nothing's changed. And the Fastnet race over in England, from England to Australia and back, that's us rounding Fastnet Rock. The Irish must have been on Guinness when they built that thing. And,
Yeah.
that's my son composing for my wife's birthday. And that's Korean on the top, by the way, the Tasmanian beautiful boat. But in that race, we were teammates with George David's Ramble 100. Same size as Comanche, but just an older generation. Big swing keel. She rounded the rock first. We're way behind her, but on handicap, we're doing well. And we're the American team, and we thought we had it made, and then her keel broke off. And no one knew it for a while because she was the big boat in the lead, while everyone else was way behind her. And thinking of situational awareness, one of the crew, a professional New Zealander, as the boat rolls over, the keel broke and the boat started to quickly roll over. The guy thought enough about what's coming to grab the jib sheet, grab one of the ropes. And when the boat went over, he jumped in the water still holding the rope. And he pulled enough rope out that he could throw it over the hull to somebody outside, and they could pull themselves up on board to get out of the 50-degree water. So you talk about, awareness. Yeah. And meanwhile, the owner, George, and his wife and 2 crew were separated from the boat, and the current was pulling him away because the boat's mast was actually sticking in his bottom. And Jerry Kirby from Newport, who's a terrific guy and fearless, thought the 4 of these guys drifting away into the ocean might need company. So he swam over to them and drifted with them, and they did the survival technique of clustering together, looking at each other's faces and all this. And but no one knew they were over because visibility was very bad. And so George David had with him his personal locator beacon in his pocket, because all the stuff on the boat was underwater. The boat turned upside down. And so George lit off his PLD, and the Coast Guard in Washington, within minutes, has a report from the Irish Sea of a distress signal. And you register these things, whether you go in the mountains or you go in the water, you register your PLD, so it has your phone number and identification. They'll call that number. They called his office. is Mr. David there? No, he's not. Where is he? He's sailing in England. So they knew that there was something real here, so they called the British Coast Guard. The British said, we have no report of a missing boat, so they called the Royal Ocean Racing Club. Is one of your boats missing, Rambler? They said, of course not, she's leading the fleet. And then they went over to look at the computer screen, oops, no signal. So they called the Irish Coast Guard. And the Irish Coast Guard goes out and the press boat says something's going on, so they follow it from Baltimore, Ireland. And they go out there and the Coast Guard goes and gets the guys off the boat, and the Irish, newspaper boat, the guys of the boat point 2 miles away to come up to the cluster. And you can see they're pretty tired. And this guy's barely got his face above water because in those days not everybody had crotch straps on their life jackets, so the life jacket rides up. Now everybody has crotch straps to pull it down, which pushes your mouth about 6 inches further out of the water. So a lot of lessons to be learned. And, other than the PLD and this whole story, what saved their life was their training and awareness, the equipment they had, and the determination, leadership shown, and then of course they had the luck. This is what we do, we train kids and adults, safety at sea.
Is it standard you're in your survival suit all the time?
On a boat like Rambler, it's so wet and cold, they wear survival suits when they're sailing. But normal boats, we don't, no. So what doesn't change? The same fundamentals are still there, no matter what. And I'll close the PowerPoint for this is a guy who I worked with in the Navy. He was in 5 years in Hanoi Hilton with John McCain. And Ned was a very, very funny guy. And when he got out of prison, he was sent to the Naval Academy to run their sail training program. And cool guy. So this is what he said: I've often compared ocean racing with being a prisoner of war, an environment with which unfortunately I've had some experience. Hard conditions, cramped quarters, bad food, really bad boats stuck by midshipmen, and diverse personalities. Instead of the guards beating you, Mother Nature takes over. You can't get out, so you make the best of it. It's a character builder. So,
That's amazing.
and that's my boat. So
What, your boat, what was how many feet?
it's 37 feet, and it's an Express 37, and
That's really nice.
one of you guys had Larry Express, right? That's yours, yeah, same design, yeah. And nice boat, and we're going to Bermuda next Friday. But I've got a film to show of Rich and my trip, but before throwing more films at you, I'd love to answer questions or comments you guys have.
You really hit the spot. When we take people out on San Francisco Bay in a 30-foot boat, and they've never been sailing, and they're scared because it's going 25 and it's an ebb tide, they're scared to death. And because we're not in charge out here, but we're having fun. Watch us. If we look like we're scared, we've got a problem.
When you see us putting on our life jackets and throwing the life raft in the water.
Yeah.
Rich, when did you start to sail?
I started, my dad would take me on his boat when I was like 1 or 2 years old. He was in the Coast Guard in the war. I couldn't go. It's so fun. You'll like the story. Dad grew up in the Depression. My grandfather, great-grandfather died in the flu epidemic the same week in 1918. So an uncle kind of took over the family. He was a sailor and skier. So that's ultimately why I ended up sailing. It's ultimately why I actually ended up here. And Dad couldn't go to college in the Depression because he didn't have the money. But he always wanted to go to Dartmouth. And because he loved skiing, and he was on ski patrol and stuff like that, and when they used to skin up the mountains and all that. And he tried to join the Navy just before the war started, and they said that he'd be an ensign. And day after Pearl Harbor, they said, sorry, we only want college graduates. And so he was really pissed, so he joined the Coast Guard and became a bosun's mate, eventually Coast Guard Academy, and became an officer. And all the guys he was with in the war who sailed were our crew, so I grew up with those guys. Dad's partner in business was Harry Jacobs. Harry's son, Terry Jacobs, was a couple of classes behind us on the ski team. And when I was born, Harry said, Ed, you couldn't go to Dartmouth, but your son should. And he signed me up, the week I was born, that early registration. So the die was cast. Now, that doesn't buy you anything. And so I get into Dartmouth, and then I apply and said, what dormitory do you want? And I said, I want to be near the food, so Masters of Fall. Well, I got it. And that's because your dorm preference is based on when you first applied to college.
Wow.
So a long way around. Dad sailed and I sailed with all his cronies from the war, and only one's left alive. He was a combat artist, Dad, which was interesting stuff. It was Tommy O'Sullivan, he knows it. They know it. So, but it's a great sport outdoors, and I like mountain climbing, but not technical stuff. Nothing like Michelle's done, but the idea of going out into the Mother Nature, and trying to plan something that might be risky, but you plan it enough that you reduce the risk, you control the risk, and then you got to be smart enough, and your friends who are with you smart enough to say, okay, let's change our plan. Let's not do what we intended to do. That's hard to do, and the more further up the mountain you are, the further you are on the ocean you go. The idea of turning around really isn't a good feeling, but sometimes it's what you should do. Yeah.
What's your sail plan on the boat right there? Are you running a
I have a bowsprit, a retractable bowsprit, and put this what's called asymmetrical spinnaker, triangular spinnaker on the tip
and
of the
then you've
bow.
got a jib inside?
A little staysail inside, and amazing. Yeah.
Does anybody use a regular spinnaker on a new boat anymore?
Most boats seem to be the asymmetrical with that bowsprit.
Yeah, that's fine.
And a friend of mine, when he first saw one of those, said, bowsprits, sailboats weren't meant to have bowsprits. And I'm thinking, clipper ships, you know, come on, guys. So we're going kind of backwards in a way, but it's fun. So, how many of you have,
Can I ask?
Yeah.
So when you go to Bermuda, can you put it on autopilot, or do you have to?
most of my racing in recent years have been double-handed with two of us on board, and there you're allowed to use an autopilot. But the autopilot can't handle the boat in rough conditions, so you end up having to hand steer. Once you have a full crew, like this year we did, you'll hand steer only. Yeah. But the technology of the autopilots for these guys who go around the world in the professional races is astounding, because the computers that drive the autopilot sense every axis of rotation of the boat, and the moment they feel the wave come under the boat, they actually start to correct ahead of time.
Oh,
So they're not responding, they're actually, in real time steering the boat, and it's phenomenal stuff. But what if it breaks? You back up autopilot, what if that breaks? You have to have some manual way of locking in the tiller and then balancing the boat. So you have to have all the backups to the backups.
Right. So how many chart plotters do you have?
I have one chart plotter, but I have 3 separate systems for GPS. And I used to stay sharp on Celestial, but I gave up on it. But the Navy stopped teaching Celestial at the Academy about 25 years ago. We had a big battle there about it.
Really?
And now they're teaching again because of cyber warfare. Yeah, yeah. So things keep going around. Yeah. Yeah. How many of you have been at sea with a problem?
Depends on what you call
Larry,
a problem.
Larry, what was
what's the
your?
problem?
Me?
No, Larry, I'm sorry.
We've never had any big problems, but I bought this old Gulf Star, I put a new engine in it, and turned out the fuel tank was all full of crap. And so every time it would get rough, we'd be out there ready to come into the harbor, bouncing around, and the engine would stop. And so I've led that thing along many times.
Well, the most dangerous time for a boat or a ship is coming in and out of harbor.
Right.
And same thing with an airplane, landing and taking off. So I mean, it's similar. That's where your systems have to work, because you have restricted space and a lot of traffic. So that's when you come to arrive at near your destination, when you arrive in Bermuda, everybody's thinking of the first dark and stormy. But more people get in trouble running up on the reefs within minutes of finishing the race than they ever would during the race.
Really?
We were dismasted on Great Potomac Bay.
Yeah.
Flying Scott.
Yeah.
And then
Last year.
Yeah, last year. So Pam and I are on the boat. Now what? Well, we're not gonna endanger, we're gonna go ashore in a friend's house, but what to do? Let's anchor. She goes down and gets the anchor and tosses it overboard. It's not tied off to the boat.
I thought she was going to toss it at you for taking it out.
No, I told him to say.
That's why they call it the bitter end.
Let me get on a little bit of video of our trip, and I'll skip through parts of it. Let me see if I can find it here. This was made for schools, so
So nobody's
you see
sweating.
some. I don't know why I'm here.
full screen.
Icon.
Why don't you come, why don't you come up here and show me?
That's an ensemble.
You
They're,
can sail around the world.
they with TV
The
on,
one with,
How the hell they ever around the world?
with
Television on the bottom right.
the carrot under.
Yeah, you look at it. They were beautiful, beautiful objects, those ships.
oh no,
Not the airplane.
No,
just
you want
hit
to
the
put
green
on
button
the,
at the top left.
send it somewhere.
Green button, top left.
No, that's gonna.
Thank you.
Very good.
Okay.
Hong Kong's a heck of a place with mountains and skyscrapers.
I came in out of Vietnam in Hong Kong when the hospital got shut down. And
Where was
my
getting hope
plan
there?
was to stay in Hong Kong.
He raced it from New York to Melbourne to break that clipper ship record, then stored it away, then we sailed it from Australia to Hong Kong.
Here's the starting line with Chinese junk, keeping track of it.
He's very dry New Englander in terms of sense of humor. Extremely reliable, good guy.
What's he holding
The crowd is starting
It's a
line.
tiller. Boat has a tiller and a hiking stick, but she's on autopilot most of the time. Very easy to steer.
Hong Kong Harbor. Convention Center. Couple of beautiful skyscrapers.
There you're motoring?
Yeah, we haven't yet started. We started the day the United States invaded Iraq. Think about how long we've been doing this stuff.
See you on the other side, and the new territories.
It's got eagles painted on the bow, pretty cool.
Now passing the last island.
Trampoline netting between the hulls,
This island is China.
so you can move to the outside. You always have your safety on sign.
Stay along at about 7 knots.
Mast is on a universal joint, so it can pivot in the center of the boat. Kind of a night shot.
How did you break up the watches?
4 on, 4 off, continuously for 72 days. You get in regularity, you sleep, you go lie down and you sleep instantaneously. It's really cool.
What do you eat?
Of course, you don't get back to normal for a while either. If you ever get back to normal.
What are you eating?
What do you mean?
We had a garbage bag full of freeze-dried food for each week. So we had 11 bags of freeze-dried food, pasta, because you just take salt water, heat it, and throw in the pasta. We had eggs covered with Vaseline that lasted about 5 weeks. We had fruit that lasted 2 or 3 weeks, but green Granny Smith apples from the state of Washington lasted almost 2 months.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they got air circulating, they're the best.
Did you put the Vaseline on the outside of the shells?
Yeah, they're uncooked eggs.
I was just curious.
Yeah, it's hard to get it on the inside of the shell.
Like water glass.
Thanks, Rick. There's the
One trick question.
we have solar panels. We have 2 wind turbines, and we had an engine that could charge batteries. We use 15 gallons of fuel the whole time we're charging, because we have most of our solar and wind. Going 15, 16 knots, that's down below the nav station, which is a good cruising speed for a trimaran. Conventional one-hull boat might be half that speed. But today's French boats go triple that.
I think so.
So this was mostly an autopilot steered trip?
You steered whenever you felt like it, but autopilot a lot. You're busy trimming sails. We call that ice station zebra, about a lot of stuff up there.
Look at that.
When the wind blows and those turbine blades are spinning, we got a flying fish go right through it, and there was nothing but puree.
Yeah, that's a good image.
Sushi, yeah.
What was the worst weather you ran into on this trip?
Off of Cape of Good Hope, and we had to heave to for 24 hours. We couldn't get around Cape of Gullis, which is the tip. Cape of Good Hope is actually up the western side, about 20 miles.
How do you heave to in a trimaran?
You take a little bit of jib and you unroll it backwards, and just set the helm in the position, you let the boat just kind of low stall at about 3 knots. You're just trying to minimize the pound down, what you're trying to do, one trimaran. What gets me is at sea, you think no land, but where do you get all these colors from? And it's astounding, the cloud patterns and everything.
Captain's work is never done. Descending into the dreaded 4 peak. Smarting the odor of stowed away vegetables and food.
You've got all these watertight compartments so that even if something was damaged and turned over, it's still flow.
The wise old tradition that boat owners don't work. Lightning over the mountains of Borneo and Paramount Island. Currently sounds to the straits of
Do you have any prolonged periods of calm?
We did. We had a couple of days in the South China Sea and a couple of days very, very light off Namibia. And we had to cross the equator twice. You know, you build up great calloused hands, the first freshwater rain, all your skin falls off. And it's, didn't hurt, but it was horrible. The kids in school just love us. And they say, show me your hands.
Oh, yeah.
Why aren't you wearing gloves?
My hands are generally fine without gloves. And yet it's the calluses that, and the tough skin that came off.
Did you have any hatch in the hull that could flip completely?
Yeah, down in the cabin, the living cabin, 2 bunks and the nav station and the galley. There's a hatch on the side, so if the boat's upside down, you can go in and out.
You can escape.
Yeah, great.
That's required now
So,
on the whole.
since Rich did the primary navigation, I did the cooking as it were. And cooking was, freeze-dried, the pastas, making whatever you could out of the vegetables.
First to sail on the water stuff.
Yeah. Well, the clipper ship ran out of wind.
Look at
Roll our sails, tie everything down, and I blow up.
So we secured everything, and then when it missed us, we put our sails
One of
on.
these chased the Maxie in the Sydney Hobart race, finally caught it, and by the way to get all the sails down, sails were torn to shreds. Nobody hurt.
I was looking for Dorothy. I couldn't find her. This is going. We have harbor scum from Hong Kong on the hulls.
And a sea snake comes in from the left side of that.
So Rich Wilson went in the water. He was on the harness, I had a rope on,
Swam after the snake swam.
to wipe the scum off.
That was the end of our
And I saw a golden thing come from under the main hull and swim rapidly towards him, a sea snake. And I just yanked him out of the water, and he's screaming because it hurt like hell. But I yanked him out of the water, and so he did the research. The sea snake is a member of the cobra family. And Rich has all these allergies and asthma, and we didn't go back in the water. We're approaching Java, Sumatra now in the Sunda Strait. It took us 12 days, it took the Sea Witch 7. And she actually still holds the record for it. But then we got out into the Indian Ocean, and we were able to cut at a better angle than she could, and we caught most of that time back up. So we had her daily log, and all the kids at school were following the Sea Witch and following us as we leapfrogged each other. And with today's modern trimarans, it wouldn't be a story. We'd just sail away. But for us with 2 on a small boat and the Sea Witch bigger, it was actually quite a contest.
Pound along here, over there.
They're the extinct volcano in Sumatra.
What are you using for King volcano?
A little Panasonic
400 meters
with a
tall.
tiny little cassettes. And this was produced by a professional, I just gave all my stuff.
Yeah.
And I was surprised at the quality. What's really great is how the windward hull flies in the air about 5 feet off the water. You can crawl out to it, sit on it, be flying over the water, looking down at it. Now we're through the Sunda Strait, in the Indian Ocean. And what's the name of that volcano? Krakatoa.
Oh, great.
That's not the original Krakatoa that blew up and sounded around the world, but that's the son of Krakatoa, whatever. And it had smoke coming out of it too. That was our last land until we got to South Africa. And 7,000 miles across the Indian Ocean, and the nearest land you're at, as you cross, the nearest land is Antarctica. And one day I'm pushing the boat hard because I'm a racer, and Rich says, we gotta go a little slower. I said, why? He said, well, if something breaks, where's the nearest land? So I went down the chart, the nearest land was Antarctica. I figured we weren't gonna get much help there. So I slowed down a little bit. But it's the judgment that you get after time at sea and knowing the boat, and Rich, of course, had that.
Did you see much flotsam and jetsam?
No, Indian Ocean, once you cleared Indonesia, you got away from the logs and all that stuff, that's very clean. In the Atlantic, I saw a couple of barrels and stuff, but where we were, it was pretty clean. The albatrosses were thousands of miles away, amazing. And some of these things like 7-foot
We are
wingspans.
April 1st, down along next to Linus Falls.
This is the bubble in the captain cabin you can see through if you want to get out of it.
I'm looking out of the Vista Dome, a nice, dry, comfortable location here. Down the road, see the Lord pontoon skimming along. I'll turn around and look back at the cafe. My God, it's the old man of the sea. What's going on?
He keeps giving me straight answers, like you're trying to.
Well, you know, you said that they have 60
So
men
how
on
did you-
Seawitch, and you had told the press there's only 2 of us, yet we found that there's an animal living in the lazarette where the head is. Any comment about that?
The animal is fabricated.
Who would ever fabricate such a thing?
April Fool's Day.
April Fools. Before drink night, we got awful lot.
The flying fish were fabulous to watch. They were total entertainment. These are little guys. Some of them are the size of a trout, up to maybe 2 pounds. And they're flying at about 30 miles an hour, and they're skimming the surface. They keep changing course, ricocheting off waves. As fish underneath try to get them, and birds on top try to get them. They're kind of living in this middle world. And
That's not dinner?
that's right. It's amazing. You wouldn't want to be a flying fish.
Did you eat them?
I know a guy who eats them regularly. I wouldn't touch it. They're very bony, they're smelly. But if you had to live, survive, you could eat them. Indian Ocean, the swell is building up regular.
What's it blowing there?
It's probably blowing 25. The average probably 25, 28. That's what we do.
You go off the wind most of the time?
Yeah, we're reaching a lot, trying to reach a lot. There were times we had to beat, or later on to see shots with a spinner, which is the best. The multi-hull would rather not go to 100, but they can.
That's pretty amazing.
And you just never get tired watching the hulls cut through the water. It's really, really good. The arms that hold the outer hull are high enough that they don't get hit directly by two ACs.
What would stop you if you were heading into the wind?
If it's blowing 30, 28, 30, you don't want to go into it. This is a flying fish sequence, and the kids in the school were crazy over this when we sent it back to them. I put a dead flying fish on the tiller and then interviewed it. Like, I've been at sea for now about 5-6 weeks. And when I got back to our high school, our junior high school in Richmond, I walked in to talk to the class. The entire lobby and all the halls were pictures of Freddie the flying fish. Every kid in the school did a poster of the flying fish.
Picture of Fred.
And we had no idea, when you're doing this, you have no idea what's going to attract the attention of the kids.
You guys like to look? I'm just going out on backwards, keeping the water from going down the back of my neck. Beard, keep the sun off my face.
The goggles, I like the
My
goggle
detectives
idea.
for Fred and his cousins.
That's for the flying fish.
Really?
Because you're at night and they can't see you, and you can get a 30-mile flying fish, and we're going 15.
2
And
pounds.
it's 2 pounds with a sharp nose, it'll take your eye out. And one knocked you down. But the hardest part about that wasn't being knocked down. It was the smell, because we're covered with scales. It took days to get the flying fish odor off. So, I thought he might want to talk to his friends.
Good, Rich.
Is he alive still?
Of course.
No, no.
not.
Sit there. What really grossed me out, I ended it by saying thanks for not going to have to eat you. And
He's dead.
he said you were kids crying.
It was suicide.
Let me just move it along here.
Wow. Rich, when
Or
you're
was
tethered,
it,
What?
when you're tethered in, Rich, are you just in that one location? What kind
You know,
of?
the jack lines, you call them, stretch from various corners of the boat. So you clip in one and move along it. Yeah.
So sideways?
Yeah, ones go across the boat, ones go fore and aft. And you have a tether which has a 3-foot tether and a 6-foot, depending on how much freedom of action you want.
Gotcha.
And this comes from having put the 6-foot one on. I got thrown across the boat last week when I should have had a 3-foot one on. So you're never too old to learn.
Have you heard those reel? They've got ones that are got a reel on them that gives you the ability to adjust it.
Yeah, I've never seen that. Never seen that.
Keep it from just pulling out.
I think it's there's some of a ratchet locking.
The only ones I've seen are the fixed length ones. And
so, I have two questions. What was the Harris moment? And how did you get along, difficult times?
we got along well, but there were moments.
To tell Ann, you look pretty good with a beard. Hides more with her face.
You know, the thing is, even though you're with somebody else, they're asleep when you're awake. You're alone virtually all the time. But at least when you're down below trying to sleep, you're not worried about it because somebody's on deck. But you have a few-minute handover, or you have a meal together. So we got along well. There were moments where, like any husband-wife type relationship, where it wasn't so well. But you get over it because you have to. And we've been very close friends ever since. This is the Agulhas current off the southeast corner of Africa. 5 knots of current running south, extremely warm water, not a lot of wildlife in it. And we're moving at 5 knots over the bottom, and we're moving 0 through the water. It's the Agulhas current. But when that current whips around the corner of South Africa, it encounters a big whale current from Antarctica, which is cold, and has a huge amount of wildlife. Whales and dolphins and all the birds and everything. The krill. It's cold water currents from the Arctic, Antarctic that bring the sea life.
Sea life.
That's where the life comes from. And the Antarctic Ocean is just a huge source of life for the ocean. And some of the biggest risks we're running, trying to avoid whales in the whale current. And at night, one time, not knowing, I sailed between a pair of whales and the spouts on both sides just bounced
my
around.
gosh.
And I had no idea they were there.
Oh my God.
We managed by paying attention to weather to avoid the worst storms. We're fast enough to get out of the way of some storms. Now finally, after being hove to, we're now passing the base. And we're rounding the corner. And for the first time since we left Hong Kong, we have a course that is to the right of east-west. In other words, we finally have our first northerly component to our course.
Was that
We'll be finishing in 2 minutes.
the hairiest part? I mean, Rich,
I think watching out for ships and you know, and floating objects, and just staying disciplined in safety so you don't make a mistake like not to clip in and go overboard when your partner's asleep. 4 hours later he wakes up and doesn't know where you are. That's Cape of Good Hope. I'm going to skip forward to, there's a great sailing scene here. We're now in the trade winds heading up the shoulder of Brazil. And we're doing 18, 20 knots, spinnaker up, autopilot working. We did this for 4 or 5 days, and this is where we passed and stayed ahead of the clipper. Until this point, we kept falling behind. And it's just beautiful watching the boat cut through.
what speed there?
Let me see if I can find another
Said
shot.
18.
18?
We had a eclipse of a lunar eclipse that we witnessed. See you taking a bite. I sailed through a solar eclipse off the Azores back in 1972. We've been at sea for 18 days, and when it got dark, the crew went nuts, and everybody ripped each other's underwear off, the classic wedgies. Put them in a cardboard box, lighter fluid, lit them on fire to get the sun back, and the sun came back. then our female cook returned to the deck. I didn't see that ship. You keep looking under the jib and all that. I didn't see that ship till she got next to us. I mean, 'cause we hadn't seen a ship in 6 weeks. So
You don't have radar on that you can see them?
we put radar if we want to, but actually we didn't have radar on this. No, we did have radar. We never used it because we had to be careful of power.
Oh, the AIS.
It wasn't invented then. And let me just get to the finish.
Do you have an AIS transmitter on your
We
boat?
do, yeah. AIS is a must. Ship's number zero. Okay. So I finally shaved just before getting to New York. There's Ambrose Light. You can see that little spot. So my friends at the Tug Company took the families out, and they wanted to throw donuts to us. And just before they did, Rich said, "We're not allowed to get any outside assistance so the record won't count." So we had to let the donuts fall in the water. And so we got there, and thank you, good goodness.
So cool.
We have finished.
The official finish was Ambrose, but the emotional finish was the Statue of Liberty.
How much did we beat the record?
By 35 hours, which tells you how good those guys are. We had a modern, lightweight trimaran, and these guys on a heavy ship with 1,500 tons of cargo. Amazing.
These tugs are out there to welcome us. They knew about it.
Honestly, the Navy wasn't, they just happened to be going by. But they saluted us.
Oh, that's it.
Yeah.
So they had a lot. But the real fun was going to schools. And Rich has been doing this for 25, 30 years now, all the educational stuff. It's phenomenal what he's done for education. And being a partner was great, and I still help him on his program.
Wait till I.
So Ann drives me home afterwards. I'm in the passenger seat on Henry Hudson Parkway, and I have my hands over my face because I haven't seen any objects coming at me close up on the fish for almost 3 months, and I couldn't watch the cars. I was terrified. We carried a cargo. Our friends in Hong Kong gave us a little square thing of tea to carry. We gave it to Siemens Church in New York. Thank you. Your questions are great, and it was great having so many people who enjoy sailing in the outdoors here. So, Bill, have you been out for an hour? You just came back?
I'm still recovering from that picture.
At any rate, I think time-wise, I think we've just gone over by a few minutes. So appreciate you being here very much. Thank you. Thank you.